Both released in 2025 to high praise, both further cementing the series they came from as some of the best anime within this generation. Yet in my opinion at least, one of these is greatly overshadowed by the other. Before I reveal how I think Demon Slayer was greatly overshadowed by how brilliant Chainsaw Man Reze arc is, I want to first talk about how I'll be comparing these two anime and the categories that I'll be putting them into. Both of these films take place within their respective worlds at very different times. For Demon Slayer, Infinity Castle was a top-off to 4 extremely popular seasons of non-stop praise and record-breaking moments for anime. Chainsaw Man, on the other hand, is relatively new in comparison, and though still widely popular, definitely lacks the pull that Demon Slayer has from its recent success. With Demon Slayer so much further ahead in its story for the anime adaptation as well, it means each category I'll be ranking the films on needs to be given proper context, and therefore, though there will be no manga spoilers for anything ahead, a spoiler for all previous seasons should be mentioned now. With that being said, the categories I will be breaking these films into go as follows. Story, this being before the film, what happens in it, and if I think the film will actually have much effect on the next installment of the series. Pacing, this being through fight sequences, story, and just the general pace of each arc within the film. Character development, not just of the main protagonist, but characters within each anime's said universe. And overall enjoyment. Pretty self-explanatory, but one I think should be there nonetheless, because at the end of the day, we're going to these films because we want to enjoy something. Keep in mind that this is just my opinion, and you don't have to agree with me completely, you could completely disagree with me, and I'd like to hear the feedback in the comments. I always think these topics are something that should be debated, and I'm always happy to hear from the audience. The comments on the last videos were honestly lovely to see, and that feedback is something that I really enjoy having from other people, so please feel free to state it in the comments below. Starting things off, we have story, and as I said before, these series are at 2 very different points. For Demon Slayer, Infinity Castle is finally Tanjiro's chance to get to Muzan after 4 seasons of alluding to this battle. We're so deep into the series now that this film is acting as the prelude to what has been built up for all these years. And therefore, though the story implements before this film are heavy, they aren't actually groundbreaking within the film themselves. Nothing has changed from this film. Tanjiro's overarching goal is still to kill Muzan. He's just now slightly closer to achieving his goal. A shonen protagonist normally always has a big goal they can't achieve until the very end, however, so it's not necessarily an awful thing for Infinity Castle. I do believe the story moves forward in how each of the characters believe they will achieve this goal. The death of Shinobu reinforced the sacrifices each character will have to make in order to beat the demons, and tonally shifted the framework of Demon Slayer to much higher stakes than we've ever seen in the series. No one feels safe now. The demons are a real threat to the Hashira, and that is great storytelling in and of itself. As for the events after though, I don't see this as a great deal realistically. Tanjiro was, at the very least, always going to survive until the fight with Muzan. It was simply a matter of what upper moon he would have put in front of him to learn and evolve from. Shinobu's death is much more hard-hitting than anything that happens to Tanjiro, and I believe it is much more hard-hitting in how it will affect Giyu in particular. And as for Kaigaku and Zenitsu's fight, Kaigaku was only shown to us as an upper moon in Infinity Castle. His fight with Zenitsu, though it was awesome, holds little weight to those around him and the story as a whole. So though I think there are some pretty high points, Demon Slayer ultimately just doesn't exactly run away with this category. I think unfortunately the previous seasons were a lot better than Infinity Castle at actually adding on to the story and making me care more for the characters. Whereas the film, though in part maybe enjoy characters like Zenitsu more, it didn't really push their story forward other than now that he's defeated the guy who he wants to defeat. And now, realistically, I don't see him doing much for the rest of Infinity Castle. I might be wrong, I've not read the manga, but for me it felt like almost like his arc was just over now. And this is also due to the fact that Chainsaw Man outpaces it completely. Though the main goal of killing the Gun Devil has remained, Denji's ethos towards this goal has clearly been greatly changed due to the conflict between him and Reze. Story and character intertwine a lot in this, but Denji's subservience to Makima is well established in the first season and fundamental to achieving the goals that she set for him. Reze arc wavers this though, and by showing Denji that there are other options like escaping with Reze, it also shows the viewer that this story's ultimate destination can also be changed. Makima has been set up more and more as a villain in this film, and therefore the story feels in limbo right now as to how her goals and the greater good will ultimately align long after this film. Whether she is actually a villain or not will have to wait and be seen, but unlike Infinity Castle, this leaves much more impact and many more questions on where the story will go next. I would like to add in Demon Slayer's defense that since Infinity Castle is so much later on in the series, it makes much more sense that the goals would be much more well established. However, this does not take away from the fact that since season 1, Muzan has always been the main focal point, and Tanjiro's goal was always to kill Muzan and save Nezuko. So it's not as if this is something that's unexpected and came up in season 3 or 4, it's always been the case. And adding on to that, there's never been a nuance quite like in the Reze arc, questioning the very people who give the orders. And that's why, for me, the Reze arc easily clears this first category. Moving on to pacing next, and we can begin with the runtime of Reze arc. With a runtime of 80 minutes, this film delivers a succinct and emotional message to the audience, while also setting up eluding questions for the next arcs. I would argue that the film is slightly short, and that time could have been spent with some extra characters, but the overall message is pretty much perfectly delivered, and the weight of what happens between Denji and Reze is definitely felt within the runtime. The film certainly never feels slow or jagged in its pacing. It's an enjoyable watch the entire time. Every scene feels important to the overarching story. I have very little complaints for Chainsaw Man in this category. My annoyance with anime films a lot of the time is that they're too long, too dialogue heavy, and feel like they are almost buffering at times with filler. None of this is present here. The story is cohesive, every scene feels like it matters and delivers the message of the film extremely well. This is honestly one of Reze arc's strongest points, and I would argue it's what sets it away from so many other anime films that just are too long and so unnecessarily long for really no reason. And the same can unfortunately be said for Infinity Castle in my opinion. With a runtime of 155 minutes, that's 2 hours 35 minutes. It feels as if it delivers half the story of Chainsaw Man. And I feel like I'm ragging on Demon Slayer a lot. I do genuinely like this film a lot, but the pacing was by far my biggest complaint. So please just hear me out for a minute, Demon Slayer fans. This film had over 5 moments with flashback sequences, and I didn't search that up. That might not even be true. I just made that up in my head, but it certainly felt like it. And for 155 minutes, I felt as if at least 30 minutes could be cut, and especially in that first half. The first half is very messy pacing wise, and I understand this doesn't help when you have multiple fights going on and you want to give each a fair share of time, but then cut all the flashbacks down, even just a little bit. It's ridiculous in the Shinobu and Zenitsu fights in particular, and a lot of the flashbacks are actually things we've already been told, so it feels like it's being dumped down for us for really no reason. The second half though has 0 of these issues, and you can just take back everything I've said about the first half because the flashbacks are extremely necessary and it tells us things that we haven't been told about Akaza. It's genuinely amazing, this fight and what happens within the second half, and it's just a shame that it felt like Demon Slayer kind of figured out its own issue about 75 minutes into the film. And for a runtime of 155 minutes, it's very demanding on an audience, and realistically you have to be so well put together and so cohesive and just gripping, which I don't think Demon Slayer is throughout the entire thing. I think throughout the second half, it's as good as Chainsaw Man, if not close to being better. But overall in the entire 155 minutes, it does not reach that same level of which Chainsaw Man does, and that's why it has to be immediately another point towards Chainsaw Man. Moving on to the next category, I think shonen anime can often be attributed to having very bland and tunnel-visioned characters, and Demon Slayer to an extent did fall down this rabbit hole in the first few seasons. A lot of the Hashiras haven't had a load of screen time to really isolate their goals, rationale, and emotions, but the previous training arc season was a step in the right direction and really got us to understand these Hashiras and why they are in the positions they are. As well as that, this film's character development is definitely noteworthy. Tanjiro surpasses his limits once again in his fight against Akaza, and Akaza in particular in this fight lays everything out for the viewer, and it paints a completely different image of the Upper Moon 3 in an amazing 20-minute flashback. For all the faults I've given Demon Slayer up to this point, I think its character development for even lesser characters like Giyu in this film is top notch. It also sets up greater challenges for other characters in the next installments, such as fighting Upper Moon 2, after Shinobu has passed. Gyomei's fight against what looks to be Upper Moon 1 seems really interesting, as well as all the other Hashira we haven't actually seen fight in Upper Moon yet. There's a lot to look at here, and like I said, I think it is Demon Slayer's strongest aspect. It's just a shame that Chainsaw Man Reze arc did this so much better. There is so much symbolism and foreshadowing in the school scene between Denji and Reze. I want to do an entirely separate video on how much is in this film, because it is amazing how Fujimoto sets up the betrayal and its effects on both Denji and Reze long term before it's even happened. Denji as a character changes completely and is questioning his own authority to Makima for the very first time. In his mind, he is essentially cheating on her with Reze, but can't control himself. And what we are left with is a man spiraling back and forth emotions as he has to reject someone he loves, only to be betrayed by them, beat them in battle, and still go back to them and the cafe by the end of the film. But unfortunately, it's too late. And this is where the development of Reze is also amazing within this film. As I said in my previous review of this film, I do think the reveal of Reze being the Bomb Devil was a bit too obvious. And though I do still agree with that to an extent, upon rewatch, you can see why this would be the case. It's not about whether or not we can tell, it's about if Denji can tell. That's why it's revealed to us through Reze killing the man on the rooftop well before anything is shown to Denji. Reze's country or city mouse speech acts as an allegory for the entire cast within this film as well, and it shows the vulnerability of Reze as she can't muster up the courage to kill Denji until it's far too late. What it shows to us in a brief explanation is the role each character has to play in the story. The element of choice is ripped from each character. They simply fill their role, and therefore it completely foreshadows each character's outcome in this film. And to put it quite bluntly, Infinity Castle just doesn't match this level of foreshadowing and development. And though I do think Chainsaw Man falls slightly short in its side characters in this film in comparison to Demon Slayer, it can't make up for how the amazing development of Denji and Reze is simply so much better than anything that Infinity Castle put together with any other characters. This is once again me not saying that Demon Slayer was bad or Infinity Castle was bad. It's just saying that Reze arc was so good in this regards that you can't even compare the two films. And for this final category, I want to compare both at the same time because this is the most opinionated one in all the categories, and also rings back to a lot of the points I've said now in the previous three categories. My enjoyment of a film often comes through the emotional impact it has on me, as well as its high-octane moments. There's a balance of the two that is important to be struck correctly. Otherwise you risk making fights pointless or pushing emotions onto people that aren't really felt by the audience. I felt shocked when Shinobu died in Infinity Castle, and I was emotional when Akaza killed himself to let Tanjiro win. But I feel like a broken record saying this, but none of this compares to Chainsaw Man. This film managed to have amazing fight sequences, just like Demon Slayer, cut the runtime in half essentially, and deliver a more emotional impact to me personally on multiple occasions throughout the film. My opinion of Infinity Castle is that it's a good film, a really good film in fact, that would have been better if it was more focused on the present and concise in its storytelling. It has the fundamentals of a great film, but loses itself in trying to treat the audience like a child, explaining every moment and not letting a viewer just enjoy what is happening. There's very little subtlety about Infinity Castle, and I think if it was maybe more condensed, I may have enjoyed it a bit more than Chainsaw Man. But as I said previously, in order to have a film be 155 minutes, you need to have a lot for the viewer to chew on. And I don't see this in Infinity Castle like I do in the Reze arc. I'm also not saying that Reze arc is therefore perfect. I obviously think it eclipses Infinity Castle in most aspects, but also lacks depth in its world building and character building outside of Denji and Reze. I do still think the more time should have been given with Aki and Angel, but this is such a minor complaint because the film is so ridiculously good that it almost doesn't matter. And my enjoyment of this film very rarely wavered, and this is once again not to say that Infinity Castle is bad at all, just that in my opinion, Reze arc is just a step above a lot of films I've even seen this year, not just anime. Its praise is well and truly deserved, and for me, it's clearly the better film in pretty much every aspect. I would like to say again, this is all just my opinion and I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. This is a much longer video than I normally do, but I wanted to give both these films the proper time after rewatching them several times and kind of respect each side of the coin, because I am more naturally biased to Chainsaw Man since I love Fujimoto so much. And I want to acknowledge that after making this video, because I want to hear feedback from other people as well. If you have thoughts on Demon Slayer that you thought I missed out on, or if you have thoughts on Chainsaw Man that you thought I missed out on, I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching as always, and thank you for all the feedback. It's been really lovely hearing everything from people, and I look forward to the next video.